Hello again. How are you getting on with the lesson so far? This week's I realise it's all about a bit of information download, and it's important that if you have any questions, you put them below each of the little videos so that we can start to answer them as we go forward. Next week it'll be much more interactive. We'll be having the live Q&A discussion, and I'll also be introducing you to the buddy coaching concept, and you'll be beginning to work with each other. But for now, let's review where we're up to. Yesterday, I introduced the concept of filtering of information to create internal models of the world. I then went on to explain that this means that we can never actually experience reality itself, whatever that is, because we only have the filtered representations of the sensory input from our five senses. This led directly to the concept that you are reacting to your map. So you are responsible for your reactions to that map. It's not what people do on the outside that causes your reactions. It's how you react. A lot of people around this point start to ask questions about how all this actually works. So today, I'm going to give you another model to explain how your mind filters this information and the role of your unconscious mind in driving your behaviour. In the schematic, you can see that a great deal of information enters the sensory stores, but very little of this actually gets through to conscious awareness. Much of the information is filtered out along the way before it reaches awareness. This initial filtering process, where much of the information coming in is simply ignored or deleted, is driven by what is most relevant or most meaningful to you at the time. This all happens very fast and totally outside of awareness. So far so good. But it does raise an interesting question. If this information coming in is filtered according to memories and meaning and what's relevant, then who's deciding that? Who is driving the filtering process if it's not you, not your conscious awareness? Well, meaning is stored in the long-term memory of the unconscious mind. This means that only a very small fraction of the information available actually passes through to conscious awareness, and this fraction is decided by the meaning filters in your unconscious mind. This is quite a big thing as you begin to consider this, because another way of looking at this is to realize that your models of the world determine what you become consciously aware of. If your models determine that it's not relevant, then you simply won't become aware of it. And if your models do determine it's relevant, then you will. This explains why two people can look at the same experience and become aware of very different things. As an example, consider two people looking at this beautiful stone bridge. The first, who is an artist, sees the interplay of light, shadow, colour and texture as she views the scene and decides how to compose it in her next work. The second, a fisherman, simply sees the bridge as an observation point to observe the location of the fish he wants to catch. Neither would be consciously aware that their perceptions were being driven by their internal maps of the world, but they are, and so are yours. Every second of every day. How are your models of the world built from your experiences of life, colouring your perceptions around you in the world today? What about your upbringing? What were the rules you learned from your parents as you grew up? Your education? Do you look at the world as an engineer, a father, an environmental activist? What about your views on health? Many of the things that we hold as right or wrong are nothing more than social norms for our culture, or things we learned and accepted as we've gone through our lives. The truth is, there is absolutely no universal right or wrong, and no meaning either. The only meaning anything has, is the meaning you or I choose to give it. All I want you to consider at the moment is that however you experience the world, whatever you believe or value, all of these are just mental constructs that you have made up in your mind. You have lived them for so long that you're not even aware that they're not real, and neither are anybody else's. The fact that they are made up at the unconscious level does not make them weak forces in our lives. Many people will fight and die to protect their view of the world. So how does this happen? How come we end up reacting without conscious awareness? Well, our brains are not only great model making machines, they are also driven to put as much as possible on automatic control. While your conscious awareness can only handle 5 to 11 chunks of information, it seems that once something is learned and you've created an internal model of how to do it, it can run automatically, totally unconsciously. While we may have very limited capacity for processing consciously, we seem to have an unbelievable amount of capacity to respond and do things totally unconsciously, without any need for conscious awareness. This ranges from everyday things like processing information from our senses with regard to how we are moving and our position in the world, that allows us to walk and move our bodies, without having to actually consciously decide to do so. You might decide to lift up your arm, but you don't actually have to think about each muscle and how to move it. You decide to move your arm, and the pattern runs. But it also relates to running a habitual pattern of how we think, about who we are, what we're capable of, and how we generally interact with the world. We are simply running habitual patterns of thinking and behaviour that we have stored in our unconscious minds, and that are triggered and run either with or without conscious awareness. If you were to think of some of your habitual patterns, what would they be? Are they useful to you? Have you ever taken time to seriously question them? I mean, are they actually useful to you? Are they even true? Are you having trouble identifying them? This isn't surprising, because most things that you are really good at, as well as your deeply accepted values and beliefs, etc., are outside of your awareness. Because everything that is well learned or mastered, be it a thought process or a physical skill, becomes unconscious after a while, totally bypassing conscious awareness and ending up in an unconscious response. When a new task is being learned, it takes a lot of conscious processing power, and brain scans of the brain in action show that large areas are brought into play while learning. But once a task is mastered and the model built, the brain can switch this task to automatic, and the brain scan shows this by indicating the amount of brain involved in any action shrinks once it is learned. This process leads to a 4-stage learning cycle. Step 1 is unconscious incompetence. In this stage, you can't do a task, and you don't know you can't do it. One example is a child who sits in the car imagining he's driving his mother's car, swinging on the wheel, having a great time, totally lost in his game, totally unaware that he just can't drive. Step 2 is conscious incompetence. At some point as he continues to play, the child we're discussing actually notices there's a difference between when other people drive and when he drives. The car isn't moving, there's no noise of the engine. He begins to focus on the fact that he can't drive the car. He becomes consciously aware of his incompetence. And we all know that at that point it tends to not feel good. But if he continues to practice, he'll start to develop even conscious competence. He gets to the point where he can drive, but he just has to think about what he's doing. And he'll still make mistakes when he tries to do too much at once, such overloading his 5 to 11 chunks of data. For example, when he's turning a corner, changing gear, someone's talking to him, the radio's blaring and the phone's ringing, he starts to make mistakes. His conscious mind's overloaded, and as soon as he stops thinking about what he's doing, he starts making mistakes. Step 4, the final stage, is unconscious competence. At this stage, he can drive without thinking. Most of the driving functions are handled by his unconscious mind, leaving him free to do something else, like think about the upcoming weekend. This is a very obvious example, but later in the program you will begin to see how most of us have developed unconscious competence in being us. We spend our lives unconsciously running learned patterns of thought and behaviour without realizing we have choices. Even if we do try to change our habits and thoughts consciously, as soon as we stop thinking about the change, our old habitual patterns of thought and behaviour come back to the fore. Now, I know everybody's experienced this, but it works the other way too. I've had clients who came to me wanting to develop mastery in something, and when we discussed it, I asked them, how would you know if you'd gained mastery? And they were sort of telling me that they would be aware they were doing well. Well, the truth is, if you've gained true mastery, it's totally unconscious. You don't actually know you're masterful. You're just doing it. I've heard a lot of people over my time in this field use the analogy that the conscious mind is like the captain who delivers his orders, and the unconscious mind are the crew who dutifully carry out the captain's orders. But when you begin to recognize the filtering carried out before conscious awareness and the amount of unconscious patterns that your mind is running, you will begin to see that if the conscious mind was in charge, he's more of a figurehead, if anything, not the captain. Firstly, the crew restrict what the captain can see according to their priorities, and even if the captain does make a decision, the crew will only carry out the order while he's watching. As soon as he turns his back, they'll be up to their old ways again. So in many ways, it's your unconscious mind that runs your life, based on its maps, associations and rules that it's made up over your entire life. The most amazing thing is that mostly this goes on completely outside of your conscious awareness. Over the next week, we'll be looking at pulling out some of the concepts that your unconscious mind holds as vague terms that don't really mean anything, and pulling them down into concrete actionable behaviours so that you can start acting in alignment with your unconscious patterns, which is really going to help you change much more easily. But for now, let's have a summary. You filter the information coming into your senses according to its meaning and relevance. And that meaning is assigned by your unconscious mind and the models it's created over the time that you've been alive. Therefore, the information getting to your conscious mind is filtered through your existing models of the world. This explains why two people can be aware of totally different aspects of the same experience, depending on their own mental models and what their unconscious mind is causing them to focus on. Your conscious capacity is very limited, and your brain switches as much as possible to your unconscious learned patterns of thought and behaviour. This is where it starts to get a bit strange. While your conscious mind appears to make decisions, it is making them on information which your unconscious mind has decided to focus on. This means that free will is only possible within the limits of what is presented by your unconscious mind. So, in almost every way, your unconscious mind rules the show. If you want to learn to change effectively and work with other people, you need to learn to work with your unconscious mind. Attempting to change by working against your unconscious models of the world is very difficult and is the root cause of why most people struggle to change in life. Over the course of this program, as you come to understand your own patterns and models of the world, the more freedom you will have to choose your responses and to bring new people into your life, to bring even more success, happiness, or whatever's important to you in your life. So for now, I'd just like you to review this again and have a think about what's really happening. And I'll be back tomorrow with some more information before next week when we get into the much more interactive phase of this program. Until then, have fun and bye for now.